This is Rising Phoenix Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Rhodes. This podcast is for men struggling with an unwanted divorce. I interview experts on divorce, mental health, and I provide insights gained from my own divorce journey. You are not alone. Join me. Joining me today is Attorney Kirk Stange. Kirk, let's just jump right into this. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Kirk Stange. I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for 25 years. I'm the founding partner of a multi-state divorce and family law firm called Stange Law Firm. So we're in 9 states currently. We have 30 offices, and we're continuing to grow and we're continuing to expand. And we certainly represent lots of men. We do represent women too. But all we do is divorce and family law. It's the only area of law in which we practice.
Awesome. Well, we're going to dive into the legal stuff. As I was saying before we hit the record button, it's been a while since I've done one. I think it's important to discuss and touch on, and in particular around custody issues, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So, I want to talk about sort of there's a lot of myths, I think. There's a lot of beliefs. There's a lot of opinions about the system. In each state, I think, is a little different. We can maybe touch on that too a little bit later. But what are some of the myths around men's chances in a custody scenario, and what is the reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people think that men get the short end of the stick and that courts sort of come in with the presumption that the women are going to get custody and the dad's going to get every other weekend and I think that, that myth is really out there. Obviously, there's some circumstances and in some courts where maybe that's still taking place. I do think with the advent of shared parenting legislation, which is passed in a lot of jurisdictions, that it has gradually gotten better for men. And, I've seen that firsthand throughout my career. I mean, 25 years ago when I first began practicing, it was a different ball game, and it was a little bit hard to get dads 50-50 custody or custody. I mean, it did seem in those days that every other weekend was sort of the norm, but there really has been a shift and a shift over the last decade or so where things have gotten better for men, and you see more and more men getting better custody arrangements in their divorce or child custody case. And certainly there's some jurisdictions where it can be tough and can be difficult. And in front of certain judges who maybe are a little bit old school, it can be tough. But as a whole, and I think, in the totality of kind of analyzing it, it has gotten a lot better for men in this day and age with the advent of shared parenting, which is really sort of taken over and seems to be sweeping through in lots of different states.
So you cover, if I remember correctly, you could correct me. I think Kentucky, Illinois. Like, you just tell me because I'll forget. I know you cover a couple.
Well, I mean, I'm licensed in Missouri, Illinois, and Kansas, so those are the three states.
Okay. Missouri. Sorry. I knew it was sort of Midwest.
Right, right. And our firm's in 9 states as we sit here today, and we're still growing. Uh,
Gotcha. Ha-
ob-
y-
yeah.
In
So it's
between the differences in the different states, is there a lot of difference, or is it pretty close, at least in the ones that you work in?
well, I've predominantly practiced in Missouri throughout my career. I mean, I've practiced in the St. Louis County, Missouri area, and a lot of surrounding counties in Missouri. Missouri's definitely gotten a lot better with custody. There's been some statutory amendments which have made uh, shared parenting a presumption, if you will, and that's, stating it very generally. Obviously, there's more nuances to that, but in Missouri, it's really changed. And when I first began as an attorney, I remember having conversations with certain judges as I was newer as an attorney, and at that time frame, judges seemed to rely on some psychological research that indicated that kids do better when they live in one home predominantly, that kids going back and forth carrying suitcases back and forth, not a good thing. And so that's what I would get oftentimes when I'd be
Mm,
advocating for my clients saying, 50-50 custody, and the judge would be like, Kirk, the research shows that kids are better to be in, one home more than the other. And that's sort of the research, and your guy's a good guy, I'm sure. But look, every other weekend, we had a parenting plan in Missouri when I first started practicing. It was based on a case called Siegenthaler versus Siegenthaler, which was sort of the norm back in the day, where it was every other weekend, a night during the week, half the holidays, half the summer. Okay. But with new statutory changes in Missouri, courts really are starting with a presumption of 50-50 custody in large part. And so things have really dramatically changed in Missouri. Now, Illinois, I've practiced in some, that's been a while. I've got offices in Illinois. I got an office up in the Chicago area. We're in Bloomington, Belleville, Maryville, um, uh, and Springfield, Illinois. So I haven't been in these courts myself here recently, but I hear from attorneys that it's a little tougher for guys over in Illinois still than Missouri. So I know there's been talk about, changing laws there to make 50-50 sort of a presumption. But in my experience when I practice over there, it was a little tougher for guys. And at least the feedback I get, it's still a little bit tougher for guys over in Illinois than Missouri. So you do, need to speak to a lawyer who's practicing in your jurisdiction because there can be nuances, there can be differences, but it is true that shared parenting legislation seems to be continually introduced in states where it hasn't been enacted, and it's been a move and it's been a wave. So if it's not 50-50 in a specific jurisdiction yet, it seems like that's the way, right? The dominoes are falling in some places quicker than others.
Do you know who's behind any of that? Like, is there a specific organization that has pushed that? Is it I don't know what led in your view, what led to that change, that first domino or whatever?
Well, I mean, some of the psychological research started to kind of turn on its head. Okay, so back in the day, the argument was, the research shows it's better that kids be in one home than the other. But then recent research has really shown this, which is that when kids are living in one home predominantly, then this has some negative impacts. Okay, it creates a winner kind of take all situation, which can cause a person on the short end of the stick to want to keep coming back, file modifications, keep litigating. So
Mm,
that's argument one. Argument two would be, historically in these scenarios, the mom's getting more time than the dad. Then what it would cause is dads to become checked out because dads didn't have equal access, equal say. They're just paying child support. Dad's falling behind in child support. And the argument, and I think the research was sort of showing that it caused some dads who were good dads to sort of give up, check out, say,
mm.
this isn't a good situation. It's not good for me. So I'm going to check out. And the research now seems to show that as a whole, kids are more emotionally healthy when they have access to both their parents. They're seeing both their parents. So, the research is sort of turned on its head. Now, there are some fathers organizations out there. Some of their names are going to elude me off the top of my head,
Yeah,
but
no worries.
you can Google it and you can see. I know there's one of the individuals is in the St. Louis, Missouri area. I know he's been really active in terms of pushing legislation here and going to other states. Y'all could Google and come up with his name. I don't know if he went to his name of this podcast, but there's one individual in Missouri who has really pushed hard and it seemed to be, sort of the tip of the spear, it seems like, in terms of going into states and really pushing this and has had pretty significant results.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I always say because in as we were saying before we started, I'm not necessarily I don't necessarily believe men get screwed. I mean, there are things. There's a financial aspect, and it's not a fun process. When I say I don't think men get screwed, it doesn't mean I think they throw fucking parties every day. It's difficult, period. But one of the things that I always sort of push back on, I always hear this from not from all men, but a lot of men. Men are always getting screwed. Okay, tell me what to change. What do you want to change? What does that mean they're getting screwed? Tell me what. And no one ever seems to have an answer. But it sounds like the answer is push for 50-50 legislation in your state. It seems like that would be the best. If you wanted to put your ire or your displeasure or whatever the fuck you want to call it onto something or into something, it would be change the legislation in your state. Do you think that is that a fair statement?
Yeah, because I mean, before the pushing of the shared parenting legislation, I mean, most custody statutes were pretty vague, and it would just say courts of
Mm,
custody based on the best interest of the child, and then they would list some generic factors. And states had abolished what was called, and this goes even further back, but called the tender years doctrine, which would indicate that kids, when they're very young, need to be with their mother, for nurturing, breastfeeding, these kinds of things need to be with the mom. Well, tender years doctrine has basically been abolished everywhere. I mean, I'm not aware of any state that still has it. Maybe somebody correct me and find one where it's out there. But I think it's gone at this point. But that was sort of first shoe to drop, if you will. But the problem is, even with the abolishment of the tender years doctrine, then for a while courts were still sort of leaning pro mother, even though the statutes were vague. But yeah, if you have a statute and the statute says courts are to begin with the presumption of shared parenting or 50-50 custody, and that courts can deviate off of that if the facts call for it, but this is the starting point, then that's a big deal. And that's in essence, I mean, don't have, the legislation can vary by state, but
Sure.
this has sort of been to make 50-50 or roughly proportionate custody the starting point.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's move to the scenario where you kind of mentioned it a little bit in Illinois, where it's a little bit tougher. What are some of best practices, strategies that men can do to ensure that they allow themselves the best opportunity to get 50-50?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things when you get granular, but I think from a big picture sense, from a psychological perspective, one of the most important things guys need to do is come in with the right mentality in these types of cases. And I think coming in with hope, coming in being optimistic that things are going to work out, that good things are going to happen, that they're going to get a fair shake. I mean, I think coming in with that mindset is huge. You know, if an individual comes in with a mindset that they're going to get a raw deal because they're the dad, then that could cause people to do all kinds of passive aggressive things, which can definitely sabotage your case. So, I mean, you've got to come in with that right mindset. And, look, even if it turns out not to be true, having the right mindset can persuade a judge, even in a scenario where maybe they lean in a little more mom. But if you're a good guy, you come with the right mindset, you don't have a chip on your shoulder, then I think that is huge. So that's the most important thing. But then past that, I mean, complying with court orders, important. If the judge tells you to do something, you do it. When you come to court, be professionally dressed. When they say all rise, rise. I mean, I think that's important stuff. If you're ordered to pay child support or if you're ordered to pay the kid's school, the kid's expenses, do it. I mean, I think that's huge. And then, another big one, it kind of goes without saying, but I mean, somebody's got to be available for their kids too. So you got to adjust that work schedule, that life schedule. If you're going to ask for 50-50 custody or more than that, I mean, you've got to actually be able to do that. And so that might mean some tweaking in terms of hobbies and activities and jobs and how you do things because you can't have 50-50 custody if you're not actually able to do it.
Yeah. I want to go back to that mindset piece because it seems I don't know. I don't know if people would necessarily think this is really important, but I think it is to your point. And so if you come in maybe kind of entitled in a way, like I'm the father, of course I should get this, or just sort of like you're going to do whatever you want, I don't care. If you come in with a shitty mindset, that includes like body language, maybe even the lawyer that you hire, the judges pick up on this stuff, right? It's not written in the law, but that definitely would affect the judge's opinion and then his ruling, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, again, court has wide discretion. Court, I mean, most jurisdictions, custody is not determined by jury, it's determined by judge. So it's the judge's perception, and that's what they see, what they hear. Um, and so, yeah, it makes a huge, huge difference. And folks really had to come in with that right mindset. And I think if you have that right mindset, then you do the right things. If
Mm.
you're coming from a place of hope, a place of optimism, trusting that things are going to work out, and then you end up doing the right things. But if you don't have that faith and hope and trust that, and this is hard. I know this is easier said than done. So
Oh yeah,
I know I don't want to oversimplify because it's easy at times.
sure.
Something happens in a case, you catastrophize and you think, oh my God.
Oh,
Oh my goodness, this is bad. This is really bad. This is really bad. Everybody does this on a certain perspective in their life, right? But you have to try to catch that in the moment and say, well, hold on, wait a minute. Maybe it's not as bad as it seems. And maybe, this will actually turn out to be okay. And so I think having that faith, that hope, and trusting, very, very difficult, very, very hard for anybody going through these cases that
boy.
everything in life happens for a reason. And while
Yeah.
you don't understand at the time, maybe you'll connect those dots later. I know Steve Jobs gave a famous speech amongst college graduates where he said you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking back. And I think that's huge for people going through a family law case because at times things are going to happen and you're going to think, oh my goodness, this is really bad. But you got to say, nope, these dots are going to connect up. Somehow this is going to work out. And if you have that faith and you don't do the passive aggressive things, right? You're not losing your temper in court. You're not losing your temper with the guardian ad litem. You don't get tempted to say, I'm not going to pay my child support this month, or I'm not going to pay that expense because I'm mad. You
Yeah.
know, all those things can definitely hurt an individual going through a divorce big time.
Yeah, well, that's as men. I'm sure you're probably familiar with this reaction, and that is anger, right? We lean on it pretty heavily. It's the one that what's the one of the few emotions we're allowed to feel as men, sadly. When you have a client that you can tell he's angry. And listen, there is reason to be angry if you've been left and lied to and cheated on and you lost half your kids half the time and maybe your house and half your 401 fucking K and like on, right? There's reason to be angry. So I get it. But when you see that, what do you do as a lawyer? You're not a therapist, but I'm sure there are times when you probably feel like one. Well, how do you handle those types of things?
Yeah, it's really difficult. Obviously, it's going to be different for the client, and so there's not a one size fit all approach. But I mean, my hope always as an attorney, and it's one of the things I always have strive to do, if you will, is, if you develop a good enough rapport with your client and the client knows that you actually do care and you're not just trying to make a buck, you care and you want to see good things. And I think that happens as an attorney through a lot of active listening. Lawyers sometimes can have a tendency to cut their client off, finish their sentences for them, these kinds of things. That drives clients crazy. In family law, we can't ever forget we're an attorney and counselor at law. And that counselor law piece, I think, really is huge in this particular area of the law. So, from my vantage point, if you develop that rapport, you develop that credibility, at some point, I always hope my client will ask me that exact question. Kirk, what should I do? And that when I see those moments, that's when I've always kind of leaned into it and say, okay, so you want to know what I would do, what, if I were you? Okay, thanks for asking. And as lawyers, if you try to push something on somebody, they don't want it. Yeah, they don't trust you. It's not going to work. But when clients ask, I mean, I think for individuals, all kinds of things. I mean, I think a lot of individuals, most individuals should probably be seeing a counselor when going through a divorce or family law case. I mean, I think being in counseling is huge. I think people should really feed themselves positive things. I mean, books, podcasts like this, other podcasts out there, really feed positive things is huge. You can watch the news all day and hear about bad things going on in the world. I don't know. I mean, everybody's going to need to keep up a little bit, but if you can try to limit that and have a positive mindset, I think that's a huge thing. Obviously, staying away from the drugs, staying away from the alcohol, is a good thing. That's not really helpful for some individuals. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm a lawyer, but for some
Right.
individuals, yeah, maybe you need some medication to get through the case, something like that. No shame in that. There's no shame in that. Guys shouldn't feel bad about doing that, but definitely staying away from the alcohol, the drugs. And I guess, the other thing is, trying to be around positive and optimistic people.
Hmm.
If you surround yourself with people who fan flames, that's not good. So you need positive and optimistic people around you. You might have friends that care about you, but if they're angry and fanning flames, maybe maybe you need to have a little distance. Oh, yeah, and the last one too. Everybody's, philosophy, religion is a little bit different, but whatever somebody's faith values are, I mean, I think leaning into that could be good. Whether it's going to church, a synagogue, a temple, a mosque, or whether it's just meditating. Whatever it is. I mean, I think leaning into positive and optimistic things that give you peace and contentment, I think huge, huge.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it is mindset is and again, all this stuff is way easier said than done, and we get that. I get that. I've been there. I was the super angry guy who I wouldn't even let my ex come to this house. I kept the home. She left, and I was like, "You're not coming here. Fuck you." Probably said more stronger words than that too. But now, what 2 days ago was it? No, yesterday. Shit, she was in the house. Like she came to grab the saxophone of my little one. So it is possible to evolve, grow, change, adapt in ways that don't feel possible right now, but it absolutely is possible, and it is aided by things like you just said, counseling, uh, having some kind of faith or something outside of you, something, and it doesn't have to be a particular religion. It could be spirituality, whatever it is. Well, I want to cover um, some of the things that are sort of you should do's trying to gain if you're trying to go from like weekend custody to 50-50. What are some of the things like you can show the court that you're I know that's a tougher battle because my understanding is the courts love the status quo, and so if something has been a certain way for a certain period of time, it's going to be tough to change it. But if they were going to make a push and they want to show the court, listen, I've done X, Y, and Z. What are those X, Y, and Z things that they can do in order to help themselves?
Yeah, I touched on some of it a little bit, but being available to actually do the more time is a huge key. So for some people, could be adjusting the work schedule. Maybe it means getting a different job, where you're more available. I mean, at times that can hinder some individuals who, work hard, which is a great thing. They got a good work ethic. That's awesome. That's fantastic. But you can't get more custody time if you're not going to be there with your kids. So, I think adjusting that schedule is a massive thing. Other things, distance can be an issue at times. If two people live very far apart, it's hard to do 50-50 custody because it's going to be a super long drive. So it might mean moving next to the mom or moving somewhere. I mean, not next door, you know what I mean, but moving
Right.
close. Right, moving closer where it's actually possible to do the more costly time because the distance can be tough. Somebody's living more than an hour apart, it's tough. So moving closer is huge. I mean, other little things. I mean, make sure kids got their own rooms, their own bed. Obviously, everybody's budget's a little bit different, in terms of what they can afford. But if you got nice place, room for everybody, that's a good thing. And obviously, that could make the kids want to come over and spend more time with you. Obviously, parents can't lobby their kids to do these things and put them in the middle. But if the kids naturally think, oh, dad's house is great, I got my own room over there, my own bathroom or whatever, this new house is great. They want to spend more time, then that certainly, doesn't hurt too. And I think, lastly too, I mean, it is true. Um, if parents, I mean, you use the example where you're actually able to come in the home and whatnot. I mean, if people are able to get along, that's not dispositive of granting 50-50 custody. People get 50-50 custody where they don't get along, but it doesn't hurt at the same time.
Yeah. Are there things like taking classes or yeah, that's one thing that comes to mind that I wonder, is that helpful? Like if I take you probably don't want to take an anger management course because maybe that singles that you're really angry. But are there like parenting classes? Like do courts look at stuff like that and care? Like is there extracurricular or above and beyond stuff that you can do that would actually be beneficial?
I mean, courts typically have parenting classes, and then, at least where I've practiced, it's actually required that you take one of these parenting classes. So I don't know that there's special credit necessarily given there. I mean, if you don't take the class, it's required. That's bad. So
Right.
you gotta, if you're required to take the class, take the class. That's true. You mentioned anger management. I've certainly had clients do anger management. Look, I mean, if nobody's bringing up the fact that, a particular individual's angry, then there's no real reason to take an anger management class. But if there is a background or history where the court and the judge, guardian ad litem's thinking that, individual is angry and they've been angry in the past, then I think taking an anger management class is a good thing. If you do it, then you're consistent with it. You can say, yeah, I used to be a really angry, mad person who was mad at the world about this case, but I've grown up. I moved
Yeah.
on, you know.
Yeah.
I'm better than, yeah. I think in that scenario, that really helps. Alcohol and drugs, if somebody's got an issue with that, getting help for that helps.
Yeah.
That definitely helps. Get help for that. Um, uh, that certainly helps individuals, whether that's um, going to a rehab, inpatient, outpatient, sometimes blowing at a breathalyzer to show the court that you're not drinking anymore, something like
Mhm.
that. That could definitely help. I think, just seeing a counselor is a good thing too. Now, most counselors don't want to come into court testify, but if you see a counselor, that's good. And including, by the way, those counselors that their niche is co-parenting counseling. So if you see a counselor that helps you deal with the other party better, I think that is never going to hurt as well.
You mentioned something that so I also run a Facebook group. I think it's the largest divorce support for men group on Facebook. There's almost 8,000 men in there, and I don't know if this person listens to the podcast anymore. I know he used to, but I'm going to mention something. I'm not going to say his name, but I'm going to mention something he brought up in his frustrations, and that is, and it's something that's relevant to what you said. You talked about distance. So, and I, as someone who went through this, I know that there was a tendency in me, and I see it all the time, is guys to run, just get away. If I just got away, yeah, everything would be better. I wouldn't have to see her. I wouldn't have to meet the maybe a fair partner or whatever. I just want to you just want to run away, and then you think it's going to solve all your problems, and you move away, and or maybe she moves away and you can't move, and I don't know. There's complexities there. I don't know. I believe the scenario is he moved away for whatever reason. I feel like, and so his complaint was, she's trying to modify it again, and he feels like he's losing more custody or something of that nature. And I'm trying to be vague, but also I don't exactly remember. But my point is, I feel like when you do stuff like move away or anything that is almost like the opposite of what you said, don't the courts sort of look at you then with sort of like a side eye, like, didn't you move away from your kids? Like how? So if we take a little more time, does it really matter? Like, you're only going to get 5 weeks this summer instead of 6. Do you really care because you moved away, right? Do courts look at it like that? Because I feel like that makes some logical sense to me.
Yeah, for sure that could happen. Now, if somebody's moving for a legitimate purpose, like they got a higher paying job or something like that, then maybe you can argue, no, I didn't move away to be further away. I just got this higher paying job, this better thing. But even that can still work against them too. Certainly moving closer isn't ever going to be a bad thing that at least that I can think of. I mean, don't move in the same subdivision. That'd be a little creepy or yeah,
Right.
don't move
Right.
next door, something like that. It's a little bit weird,
Right.
that, but moving closer within the same metropolitan area, not a bad thing. But yeah, if you're moving 5, 10 minutes further away, that's not a big deal. 15 minutes, probably not a big deal. But yeah, if you're moving far, far away, sort of get away, yeah, it's not helpful because, the longer distance that the kids have to travel to get from one home to the other home, it could make it more challenging and difficult. And courts might argue, hey, it's 2 hour drive to and from the homes, that's too much. We don't want to do that multiple times a week or something like that. I don't know. It's a bright line, hour, hour and a half. What's the line? But yeah, I think for most individuals, if you're living in a metropolitan area, you're probably in pretty good shape if you stay within that metropolitan area. If you want to get a little distance, you can get a little bit of distance. But yeah, if you're moving from the area somewhere further away, it's not,
Yeah.
it's helpful unless you're the the parent with the majority of the parenting time or something like that. And there's a real legitimate reason.
Do you think that that's part of the? I'm gonna kind of lead you a bit here, but I feel like part of the problem for men sometimes, and this is why I like to have more positive discussions like this instead of yeah, we're all getting fucked. It's why even fight? But I feel like a lot of times men don't fight, and that ends up biting them in the ass when they do try to do a little bit or whatever, and then they say, "Oh, the system is screwed." When in reality, they didn't fight to fucking begin with. Do you see that a lot in men? Do you see a lot of, and it's a general question, it's probably not fair, but do you see a lot of men that just sort of don't want to fight because they don't think they're going to win?
Yeah, I mean, for sure that's the case. I mean, I've, divorced more people than I can count. I mean, I've even seen women do that too. I mean, I think,
Hmm.
what it can come down to is it's a tolerance level on the part of certain individuals to endure. We're all made a little bit differently, and some individuals know when the time to dig in and be patient, and know that it's one battle doesn't, I hate to use the word battle because, litigation, family law, but one battle doesn't necessarily mean who won the war. So, I mean, you're going to have some bad days when you're going through a case, but you just stay dug in and you lose a particular battle, still win the war. So, yeah, I mean, and I think having that, and I know it's easier for some people too, the bigger budget somebody has, the more money somebody has can make it, lot easier for them to stay in for the long, long haul or something like that. But yeah, some individuals just want to make it end. They just want to be divorced. They want the case to end. They want it to be over with, and then they agree to something that's really bad and detrimental, and it's very hard to come back to court and change it later. And I think a lot of individuals don't realize that.
Yeah, I think you're right because I again there's things that I've seen evidence and guys don't fight and then they get pissed because they didn't fight and then they want to fight and the court's kind of like um where were you 3 years ago or like why did you agree to this
Right.
I get it it breaks my heart in some ways but I think what ends up happening is to get mad at the system and it really should be mad at the person in the mirror I say that with all the sympathy in the world because I felt that myself. I remember talking to a guy who had been through his second divorce. He was kind of he's a work. We worked together at one company and we stayed in touch, but I wouldn't call us friends, friendly. But anyway, I remember reaching out to him because in the beginning, I reached out to anybody I could talk to. Cashier, yeah, my wife's a whore. Um, I mean, anybody. And I remember saying to him, man, I just want to get away from here. And he said, I remember the piece of advice he gave me was like, it's not going to help. You're trying to run away from it, your pain, and you can't. Wherever you go, your pain will follow. And so I completely sympathize, but I also think you have to be realistic and say, okay, I fucked up. What can I do now? Instead of just saying, again, back to a mindset, the system's fucked. It doesn't matter what I do. It's never going to work out in my favor. I feel like is just such a huge disadvantage. And I think that's why these conversations are important. I really get frustrated by the victimization that some men live in when they go through this. And I think a lot of it is of their own doing. Um, which leads me to wonder, do you find yourself having to push men sometimes? I know you sort of said it earlier where you're like, you don't really want to give advice, but do you find yourself having to at times push men to dig in a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. And again, I mean, what the tough part can be too, people can get very hung up on fees and how much they're spending and they're like, "Oh, yeah, you want this to go so you can make some more money," kind of thing. And I know a lot of people think that way about lawyers. You're just trying to make an extra buck. So as a lawyer, you got to make sure it's like, listen,
Yeah.
our phones are plenty busy. There's plenty of other people willing to come in and have us represent them. So, I mean, while it might seem like we make more money by dragging this case out, we got plenty of people waiting to come in. It really doesn't make a difference at the big picture sense in terms of the budget of our firm. Phones are ringing off the hook. So if I settle your case today, if I settle your case 6 months from now, we try you know what I mean? It's not going to make a big financial difference to me. So you got to get past that with a lot of people because a lot of people, when you tell them to dig in and persevere and endure, a lot of people's initial reaction is, well, you're just a lawyer and you all just want to make more money. So of course, you're going to tell me that. But one of the things I try to tell people, then once I get past that, is people really have to understand how overloaded most court systems are. I mean, most people don't realize it. I mean, you got 50% divorce rates in the country. I'm generalizing.
Yep.
4 out of 10 kids are born out of wedlock. And so the new divorce out there is these paternity cases, which we generically call them as lawyers under the Uniform Parentage Act, which is custody cases between unmarried parents. And there's a limited number of judges in most jurisdictions, and there's only 365 days in the year. And courts are closed on weekends and holidays. And heck, judges take vacations and get sick too some days and can't hear these cases. And so, I mean, a metaphor. I mean, again, I've predominantly practiced in St. Louis County, Missouri my whole career. And I tell people, I'm like, look, we got about 1 million people here, right? About 1 million people, 50% divorce rates. 4 out of 10 kids are born out of wedlock. Courts only open 360, there's only 365 days in the year, but courts closed on weekends, holidays, judges get sick or whatnot. We got about 10 judges. How fast you think things are going to move over there? And so you've got to be patient. And that's where a lot of people think they're losing. When they're not losing, they're just on a docket and it's not going to move quick. So you've
Yeah.
got to be patient. You've got to know these cases take a while and good things come to those that wait. And it stinks. I know, because the longer it drags, it's like a weight on somebody's back. It's like the monkey on their back. They just want to get it off. They want it off as quick as they can. But that's where I just think the mentality and the frustration tolerance and the feeding yourself with positivity is so huge and doing good things. That causes somebody to be willing to endure tough things. And candidly too, I mean, I just think, life is whole. There's a lot of great things that happen in everybody's life, I'm sure, but there's a lot of hard days.
Mm.
And yeah, being able to tolerate those hard days is part of life. And
Yeah.
they get the monkey off their back, which is the divorce or the family law case. It doesn't mean they're not going to be sickness in their life or their family life, that loss of jobs, other things that happen. And so, you know, people just have to be willing to tolerate it and understand that, look, it's a backed up court system and it's going to turn out well if I persevere and I keep moving forward with the right mindset.
Yeah, yeah, man, it's so. I mean, honestly, I think mindset is why I do this fucking podcast. To boil it down is to help people get into a better mindset. And there's a lot of nuance to that. Again, all this shit easier said than done, but I completely agree. I want to cover two-ish more things. One, maybe I want to try and bring a little bit more positivity because I think there can be a lot of negativity here, and I think it's humans who are negatively biased. But one thing that I think it's going to start as a negative discussion, but I want to hopefully hear some positives, and it's something that I also see a lot is false allegations. And unfortunately, I think there could be some changes there to the law in terms of maybe perjury. It doesn't seem like family court brings people up on perjury. Um, do you see a lot of first maybe two questions? Do you see a lot of false allegations, and do you have any well advice? But then do you have you seen a false allegation turn into a positive? Obviously, I'm speaking men, but maybe there's another scenario. Probably not. It's probably going to be the other side. But can you talk a little bit about false allegations and how you handle them and what you've seen with them?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen lots of cases with false allegations through the years for sure, and sometimes the people who bring the false allegations actually believe them, which is the tricky thing. Sometimes they're just broad bad faith in a whole. Yeah, I mean, I've seen cases where one party accused the other of sexual abuse. I think they actually believed it. Only when I got to looking at the records and you have experts look at it, it's like, no, I don't think that happened. I know you believe that that happened, but it didn't happen. So that's the tricky piece. I've seen flat out false allegations too. So I mean, were people I think knew that they were false and were bringing the allegations, but the way to refute these is through records if they exist to refute them, third party witnesses if they exist to refute them. It's very tough when it's a husband and wife in a room alone and it becomes he said, she said about what took place or something like that. That's where it's more challenging. One case I can think of in particular where somebody was just sort of caught dead to right in raising false allegations. I remember a lady in a divorce filed an order of protection against my client, said that he called and threatened to do X, Y, and Z to her, which was really bad. And my client was a good guy. My client swore to me he didn't do that. He would never do anything like that. I believed him. He didn't seem like a hot under the collar kind of guy who would do anything like that. But I remember getting her under oath on cross-examination and getting her to commit to the day that he called and the approximate time that he called, and I subpoenaed the cell phone records. There's no call that day. So it's like, okay, ma'am, so you say he called on, I don't remember the date.
Right, right.
He called on July 1st and he threatened he was going to strangle you. Yeah, July 1st, he threatened he was going to strangle me. And you say it happened between 1 and 2 p.m. Yeah, 1 and 2 p.m. Well, ma'am, let me show you a copy of Sprint cell phone records, right? Is this your cell phone number here? Yes, it is. And you agree with me, this shows calls incoming, outgoing. Yeah, it does. Show me on there where he called you on that date and time. And she couldn't. So I mean, records are a good way to get somebody on these kinds of things. And certainly too, if somebody says there's physical abuse, but then there's no medical records to show that, I mean, then you can refute it, that particular way. Somebody says that they're sexually abused, there's a rape kit, maybe it showed that there's nothing there, then you can refute it that way as well. One of the things I got a little podcast of my own that I do from time to time, and one of my most recent one was on psychosexual evaluations. If somebody's being falsely accused of sexual abuse, there's what's called a psychosexual evaluation where they can get evaluated by a psychologist who specializes in sexual abuse, and they can have them do paper pencil test, get their background, The most un-PC part of it is they can attach a device to the, the male genitalia, if you will, show stimuli and measure whether there's arousal or not arousal. And look, in some cases, somebody could be accused of sexual abuse, but psychosexual evaluation comes out like, no, there's nothing here, So, I just think having as much objective, concrete, tangible evidence as possible is what's really important for trying to refute these allegations. And but again, where it's really difficult when it's he said, she said, two people in a room, nobody else there. That's where it can be, much more challenging. Yeah, and I guess the only other thing I'd say on that point too is this is where somebody's demeanor in court can make a big difference. If somebody's accused of this stuff and they're calm as a cucumber in court and they're respectful and they show up on time and they don't lose their cool, that's where a judge is going to be more likely to believe them. But if they look angry in court, mad in court, those are the kind of things that can kill somebody too.
Yeah, I actually I crossed out mindset because like, all right, we covered that, and then I circled it again because like obviously everything is perception, right? And especially if there is a not much evidence in her, we'll generalize and say it's her. Obviously, that's most of the time, right? And her allegations, her accusations, and so they have very little to go on. But your demeanor, your mindset, your body language is certainly something they can have additional to go on. And if it in any way because people fill in stories right with the information they have right if and the judge doesn't know them really he's got her accusations and allegations and if the only other input you mean there could be other stuff evaluations or rape kits or those kind of police reports whatever but barring that right there's a vacuum there and the only thing he can fill it in with is his perception of the other guy of the guy so yeah mindset I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, grid
um
communication is the other one too. If a guy's sending nasty, mean text,
Mm,
mean emails, and they're accused of stuff, that'll kill somebody too. So people have got to be really careful with what they put in writing and normally put a draft of something together, wait 48 hours before you hit send, you know.
yeah.
Because if you said a bunch of nasty stuff and then you say you didn't do it, that can hurt you too.
Yeah, I mean I was guilty of being a dick, let's just call it that in the beginning for sure. I do want to talk about this false allegations just a little bit more. Why do you think and I don't we can't harp on it, but I'm just curious. It is what it is in terms of this is the way the court seems to be handling it. But why do you think there isn't sort of perjury charges to people who, you put someone on the stand and it was very clear she was lying. Why do you think the court doesn't go after that person?
I mean, I'm with you in a lot of respects, and I don't necessarily disagree with you. You would think that there would be a little bit more of a backlash. I mean, one, these are civil judges, so they're not it's not a criminal court. So, I mean, what they'd have to do is make a referral to the prosecuting attorney, and then the prosecuting attorney would have to, lodge perjury charges or set a grand jury and see if they could get an indictment. And then, right. And then you got to do a separate criminal case. So, one, the judge can't in and of itself just charge the person with perjury. At most they could do is, make a referral to the prosecutor's office, I guess. But there's a great hesitancy in a family law case, uh, for various reasons, to want to charge somebody in these kinds of cases with perjury in these kinds of circumstances. At most, what I think people get sort of dinged on is they can get ordered to pay the other party's attorney fees or a portion of their attorney fees. Um, Court can find them uncredible than on other issues. So if somebody, is dishonest and the accuser's spouse or something, judge might say, yeah, I don't believe you. Because, I don't think you were candid with me. But yeah, I think the biggest issue, I mean, is just sort of a technical legal issue, which is judge or somebody's going to have to make a referral over to that prosecuting attorney's office. And then prosecuting attorneys can be like, I don't know, do I want to indict somebody on a family law case? And that's where I think there's kind of like, well, we got real crime. We got to try to, we got murders, rapes,
Yeah.
these robberies, and we're like, we got limited resources. Do we want to do this? And I think that's where a lot of it ends.
Yeah, I imagine it's probably more than anything, it's a resource issue, I would guess. And I would guess it also that's not very comforting to someone who has gone through this, right? It feels like um they don't matter. Like if someone tried to say you raped them and in a family court setting or beat them or whatever, and it turns out to be false, and you can't do anything about that, so to speak, I'm sure that's very frustrating. But the reality is it's probably a resource issue, a logistical issue. It sounds like, um, but I guess I mean it is what it is. What can you do? Is there anything? Is it if I'm just trying to find the positive here? If because if someone this happened to someone, I'm sure they must feel very frustrated. Is there anything that could, if you took away the resource issue, do you think there's any kind of law that could be passed about perjury in a family court setting? Again, take the resource question out of it. Suddenly we're sprouting judges. They're growing out of the ground. Do you think there is something that could be done, or what could be done to sort of, I guess, if I'm being honest, punish people for lying?
Um, there, I mean, you can't try to sanction somebody. So, most rules of civil procedure in any state allow for sanctions. So that's different than perjury charges. Typically, for sanctions, a party is ordered to pay attorney fees. In theory, a judge could put somebody in jail for a day or two if they're held in contempt or sanctioned. There's criminal contempt in theory, so a judge could go that route. But in terms of statutory changes and amendments, I mean, it's interesting because I think it's all, in a way, it's all kind of already there. If you lie under oath, it's perjury. But it really does come down to that sort of resource issue, and it's just that, again, prosecutors have what's called prosecutorial discretion. Prosecutors all the time do what's called nollie prosecution, where they say, well, there's a technical violation here, but we're going to nollie this one. I don't know. I don't know if there's a way, you know,
I mean, it sounds like it's sad as it is. Don't take it personal. I mean, obviously, someone lying about you is personal, but I mean, the court's not doing anything about that is not a personal issue. It's you know, priority issue, right? Again, to your point, like if there's a bevy of murders and shootings and stuff, then that's going to trump you being lied about in your family court proceeding. And that's I'm not saying that makes it better, but that's just the reality.
Yeah, but if somebody was dishonest and it's proven that they're flat out dishonest, at times it gets to be on the line because then somebody will say, well, that's not really what I meant. That's not really what I said. And so it's not as obvious. But the example I gave you where somebody
Yeah.
said, hey, call me on X date at X time, and then it just didn't happen. I mean, the way you then want to use it is discrediting them in terms of other substantive issues in the case. So I mean, I think you could still use it in that regard to say, well, Judge, I mean, it's not only this, they're saying all these other things. You should disbelieve all of that. And Judge, that their dishonesty could, you could try to tie it to the best interest of the kid somehow and say, look, if they were dishonest about this, I mean, I have other concerns about them. It's kind of a slippery slope argument, if you will. But I mean, how might a trustee going to show up to the exchange, or how that they're going to show up to
Right.
the above board, or they say that they're going to I'm supposed to have access to the kids. They say the phone broke. How am I to believe that, or whatever? So I mean, try to take it and tie it into the substantive issues of the case. And I think that's fair. And I think most judges, if somebody's just flat out dishonest, I mean, I think that's if you want to get into positivity in terms of how that can
Sure.
impact. I mean, I think that's the way to hope that it has an impact versus, just trying to put the other person in jail on perjury is a little, it's a little vengeful. And then
Right.
do you want to explain to your kid, yeah, mom or dad are because they lied under oath in the case and I called the prosecutors. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
the thing you got to think about in these scenarios too. It's like, okay, so your ex lied, whether it's the mom or the dad, they lied. It's like, but do you really want to put the parent of your kid in jail? I mean, I think most good people are going to be like, I'm not happy they lied, but I don't want to see the other,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's where, if an individual pushes that too far, then they start looking a little bit vengeful. You got to be careful.
That makes total sense. All right. I want to ask one more thing and put you on the spot a little bit. Not that I have an all interview, but I want to ask for a success story. You don't have to obviously give names, but something where there, a feel good story for a man that you can share that will hopefully give a little hope to those listening. Do you have any of those kind of things that pop into your head immediately?
Yeah, I mean, I've done, like I say, I've divorced more people than I could count, and tried a lot of cases throughout my career. So there's a lot of them. There's two I was sort of, I tend to kind of when I drift off, and thinking about, I'm getting to that point in my career. I've been doing this 25 years, so you do kind of, all of a sudden you get to a point in your career where you're like, one, you're a new lawyer, and you think, oh my goodness, you just kind of your eyes are wide open. You're like, wow, it's amazing. I'm an attorney. They let me do this even. You're a new lawyer. And for real, that's how originally you're like, I can't believe it. I can't
I
believe
bet.
Yeah, you have those days. Sometimes I still even have dreams about taking the bar exam over again. And I wake up and I'm like, what in the heck? I took that 25 years ago. Why am I dreaming about that? So you start kind of eyes wide open as a lawyer. But then, yeah, I've been doing this 25 years now. So you get kind of reflective. In a couple cases in terms of men, that trials I did that make me feel good reflecting back on my career, that were positives for guys. One, I had a case of an individual where the mom gets remarried. There's a kid, and my client, a really good guy. But like he's out somewhere on the West Coast. This has been a long time ago. Okay. I want to say he's in California and mom's here in Missouri. Mom gets remarried. She wants to have her new husband adopt the kid, step parent adoption. That would have terminated my client's parental rights. And, my guy was extremely distraught about that. He's a good guy, cared about his kid, loved his kid. Um, Young, didn't have a lot of money. Um, Tried to keep in contact with his kid. But like a lot of people, when she moved to Missouri, didn't know how to stop that, didn't know what to do, just didn't know, wasn't happy about it, wasn't excited about it, but then didn't have the money to be flying to Missouri to see his kid all the time. So he doesn't have a lot of contact. And, Missouri, you can, and I think this is probably, laws are going to be a little different, but generally the same in other states where if an individual has neglected their child for a period of 6 months, you can try to terminate the rights. So the mom said, look, he didn't do much the last 6 months. Didn't really pay much money, didn't do much. I want to terminate his rights. So good guy, very distraught. I know his whole family was behind him. I remember his grandfather gave him a bunch of money to help fight this. This is a multi-day trial I did. And yeah, we were able to defeat the termination of parental rights. And I remember, my client very happy, crying, his grandfather in the courtroom crying, and very excited. The judge said you could have done more, but you're a good guy. And look, this kid can have two dads. It's okay. He can have stepdad and he can have real dad. Why would we want to cut real dad out when he's here and he cares? Why would we want to do that? So yeah, that was a trial, because termination cases to me are kind of like death penalty of family law. If you lose, you're not talking about not having 50-50 custody. You're talking you're cut off. It's like you're not the dad. So that was a big one. Another one I remember case I did pretty early in my career. I remember being out, man, maybe it's 5 years or something, where the mom had custody. It was like three girls, and mom was pretty neglectful. Didn't really give the kids a lot of attention, and the kids kind of watching themselves a lot. I had a guy who had every other weekend, and he's a good guy. He wanted custody of his girls and was not happy. I mean, mom really, very neglectful. And this is at a time when dads weren't getting 50-50 custody. I remember doing a multi-day trial in this guy's case and got him sole physical and sole legal custody of his girls. So that was another case. I remember how excited and happy he was. And that's a case I think back on in my career. When I'm trying the case, you feel a little in over your head. You're like, oh my goodness, still a pretty new lawyer. But he's a good guy, good fact pattern. And that's a case I'll never forget.
What would you attribute to his success? What were a few keys to his success in that trial?
Well, I mean, I think that I mean, one, I don't think anybody questioned how much he loved his daughters, how much he cared about them, and even when the mom had more custody time, I mean, he talked to his kids every day. His kids loved him. I mean, they loved their mom too, but they
Right.
loved him. But he was a genuine, warm guy. I remember he's a pretty big guy, like pretty strong, burly guy, but he's like a teddy bear and he loved his daughters and he loved his kids and he was always there for them. And yeah, he didn't do the angry text and it was a long time ago where we texted back then, but he wasn't sending angry emails and wasn't yelling and screaming and hollering, but he was just a good guy, an above board guy, and he offered stability and he obviously cared about his girls. And I think he came off very, very well in court. And yeah, I think that was sort of the key for him as a whole, but good
Was
guy.
Was there evidence too, like, because I think one of the pieces of advice I always hear and I even give is document everything. Was that a factor? Is that something that you recommend that you see being significant in a court case?
Yeah, I think documenting is really important. And there's a lot of software out there that practice management software where people can document in that. But I mean, even in the absence of that, I mean, just having a Word document and put the date and noting significant things that happen because people forget. People forget things happen, you forget. So yeah, I think, and you can't, every little thing you're not necessarily going to document, but if there's a big event, big key thing, really important to do that and do it. Just make a habit of doing it. And again, it can just be two, three sentences. So yeah, I think documenting is definitely an important thing. And substantive records, I mean, getting school records, getting medical records. I mean, maybe the kids are showing up late to school or, having a lot of unexcused absences at the other parent's house. Family service records, if there's been hotline calls and these kinds of things, police records. I mean, tangible records are important. Sometimes clients can be resistant to this because like, oh, that sounds like it's going to cost a lot of money. And it's like, well, yeah, I understand, but do you want to win your case or
Right.
because if you just come into court and it's he said, she said, you're just kind of rolling the dice. So if that evidence is out there, yeah, then it's really important to get it.
Yeah. Well, Kirk, I really appreciate you doing this. What's the best way for people to find you? I know you mentioned you have a podcast. How can people get in touch or learn more about what you and what you're doing?
Yeah, our webpage is stangelawfirm.com. That's a hard one to spell, but we have a redirect webpage. It's called familylawrepresentation.com. So if you type in familylawrepresentation.com, that'll take you to our webpage. Our phone number, we got a toll-free number, 855-805-0595. Then we got links to the podcast there. We got lots of videos. And one of the things about our firm is we do have a giant webpage. I mean, I think we have one of the largest divorce and family law web pages in the country with tons of information. So individuals looking for a lot of information on divorce and family law. I think our web page, I'm proud to say, is has lots of information, a little mini encyclopedia of family law, if you will.
Awesome. Thanks again for doing this. As you know, via the outline I sent you, the last question I asked everyone is, what words of wisdom would you impart to a man just beginning his divorce journey?
I mean, it takes us back to the beginning of the podcast, I think. But I mean, I just having hope, having faith, having trust that it's going to work out in the end, and that you know that there's going to be speed bumps along the way. There's going to be bad days in your case, but just having faith and trust that things are going to work out, I think leads to things working out because then you're doing above board things in your case versus doing things to sabotage yourself that's passive aggressive or comes off as angry or whatnot. So try to fix that mindset out of the gates. And we talked about the other things like, if you need to see a counselor, read positive books, positive podcasts, do positive things, huge key. And one other final tip, something I didn't mention. I mean, keep busy. I think that's an important thing. I think aloneness can be the enemy when going through a divorce or family law matter. Now, keep busy doing productive things, right? So not
Right.
using things and partying but if there's things you enjoy, like you enjoy running or jogging, do that. If you enjoy going to the gym, do that. If you enjoy going to sports events, do that. Whatever it is that brings you joy, try to keep yourself busy because I think that's a huge key because otherwise you can just sit in aloneness and just sort of think about your case. And that's not what you want to be doing. You've got to somehow find a way to enjoy life while the case is going on.
Yeah, I agree. Kirk, again, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you so much for watching and or listening. If you are feeling alone on this journey, please join our Discord server. Becoming a Phoenix is not a solitary act. It is one achieved through community. Our Discord server is just that, a community of men fighting to survive, thrive, and rise from their divorce. Go to risingphoenixpodcast.com/Discord for information on how to join and what is contained in our Discord server. Please join us.